Sean and myself were invited to come out tonight to just talk about, in general, the compliance and the groundwater that's done out at the facility. Easier concerns to let you know what compliance tasks the site goes through and allow you to ask some questions. No, it's gonna work. So again, real quick, Sean and myself have been doing this for 22, 25 years, and mostly in the groundwater compliance for solid waste facilities. Yell at me if I'm in your way.
Oh, no, I'm good.
So we're going to provide you with a basic understanding of the landfill design as it relates to the groundwater and the groundwater current. So where the groundwater is at in this local area, and groundwater surface water monitoring that's done at the site, and then what we do with the data that we collect. So this is just a general idea of how groundwater works in the subsurface. So we've got wells in the ground. Some of you have supply wells at your houses, and we have monitoring wells surrounding the landfill. So these wells are set in a deep sand aquifer below the site, and that water flows in this area. It's going to flow from the northwest to the southeast towards a larger water body where it's going to reach the surface. So this is just a general idea, not specifically to scale for the Arbor Hills Landfill, but just a general idea of how water is collected from the ground and how it flows. So at our site at the Arbor Hills, it is present in a series of sand aquifers below this facility. So we have clay from the surface down to a depth where we have a primary aquifer. In that clay layer, we have some smaller intermittent sand zones. In each of those zones, we have groundwater monitoring wells that we're collecting samples from. So at the facility, we refer to these as the shallow, the intermediate, and the lower, which is the primary aquifer, continuous across the site. So like I said, that primary aquifer is separated from the landfill by a clay layer, and that's an impermeable layer. Groundwater is not going to flow through that clay layer at any fast rate, and that offers additional protection to our groundwater zone from the landfill's presence.
Is that natural or is that man-made clay?
That's natural clay. And then in some areas of the landfill where they have, depending on the design, they put in recompacted clay to gain additional protection and thicknesses.
So 10 to the minus
7.
7,
Yep.
okay.
And that's all permitted, required, 10
Right.
to the minus 7, and certain thicknesses are all required.
I was just curious if it was natural or if we had to put in
Yep,
additional.
nope, that's all natural. So groundwater sampling is done at the site and is permitted through the DEQ, which used to be the DNR, is now the DEQ. Currently it's called the DEQ, and it's currently under Part 115. This site itself has 25 wells surrounding the landfill. We have up-gradient monitoring wells up north of, or up along 6 Mile, and then we have wells surrounding the facility on all 4 sides. So we also have additional wells. I don't know if you can see this. So this map over here in the corner is an aerial photo facility. Each of those little dots represents a monitoring well. Some of them we monitor, and others we use for just groundwater level collection, so we can confirm groundwater flow rates and directions at the site. So groundwater is sampled from these wells up to 4 times per year. And the state has a list of typical monitoring parameters that we're looking for. And at this site, each of these parameters listed here, from the ammonia down to the volatile organics, are typical landfill parameters. So that's what we expect to see in the landfill leachate. We're going to sample the groundwater, and we're going to look for the occurrence of those parameters. Now that top list, ammonia, chloride, boron, TDS, and TOC, those are all naturally occurring in groundwater. So what we do is look for significant changes in those levels, and that's what identifies any impact from the facility.
Can I ask a question, or
Yeah.
do you want us to wait till the
Nope,
end?
go ahead.
So this map, the groundwater flows from the upper left to the lower right?
Yep, yep, from the northwest towards the southeast.
How
And
come you
that's
don't have more things in the southeast corner? It seems like that's where anything that you go.
We have coverage along Napier and along 6 Mile. And this spacing, it's a little tight there. I mean, it's
Okay.
hard to see on that map, but the spacing is prescribed. And we've done studies to show what the dispersion is and what's the appropriate spacing for wells,
Okay.
based on the groundwater flow rate and the direction.
Do you do any outlier sampling like B-Tex or H2S or
BTEX is
anything like that?
included in the volatile organics list.
Okay, so you do pick up the
Yeah, so those are the things that aren't naturally occurring in
right,
groundwater.
you pick
and
up the
we're-
allophanics and
Yep,
all that,
and we're looking
and the
for those.
PNAs and stuff like that too?
Yes,
Okay.
How do you know all this?
on a prescribed
I don't have
schedule. 'cause-
biology.
Oh, okay.
On the south side of the landfill, that the groundwater is collected and rain runoff, into that, you have what, like a river, a pond, then it has like a mini dike or a dam on it. And where does that flow into then eventually? Does that go into the Johnson? Where does that
So
go?
for stormwater, I'll skip ahead 1 second here, so, right here. So stormwater, any surface water from rain that touches the waste at the facility is collected and managed within the leachate collection system.
In that area that I see on the south side by 5 miles?
Nope.
No?
Nope, so any rainwater that hits the site outside of the active waste area is managed through a series of ditches and the sedimentation basins.
Which is
So
on
those-
that.
Any point?
Yeah.
And where does that run to eventually?
So these are collected here. These sedimentation basins are
Yeah.
sampled. The overflow here is, there's an outfall and it gets out to Johnson Drain.
Johnson Drain, okay.
Yep, and then Johnson Drain ultimately flows through the Ridge River watershed.
Is there testing done with that water in those, you call them ditches?
Yep, so there's a series of ditches around the facility that manages the stormwater that hits the site, ultimately flows to the sedimentation basin. Those are sampled, and then there's an outfall.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yep.
Do you do any sampling for the composting area too? Because obviously that has a lot of TSS roll-offs from
No,
that.
there's no sampling performed around the compost area. The compost area is upgrading of our facility.
Right.
So anything that the compost area would result in, we would see that at these upgrading wells in down here. So if we were to see any impacts at these downgradient wells, we would be looking for that source up and be investigating whether or not that compost area is
And you also
resulting
have an old landfill north of that too, right?
north of here.
Yeah. Where's my anchor boat guy?
Here it is.
There's a, I'm pretty sure it's in that area. There's an abandoned landfill north of that.
So that's gotta be probably north of where I'm picked, so Advanced
So all your-
Disposal's property cuts right
Take one of
So you're saying all the,
Oh,
all the
sure.
flow is from basically the north?
from here through here. Yep.
Okay. Interesting.
So going back just quickly, the groundwater data that we collect from each of our monitoring wells, we sample that up to 4 times per year. And then what we do with that data, we run statistical tests on it, and then we do comparisons of the state groundwater protection standards. So the statistical test is going to tell me if there's any trends in the data. That's going to help me predict if we're going to see a problem before we get an exceedance of the protection standard. So if I have trending data, it's going to exceed a statistical limit, and the state in our permit requires us to investigate that. What is the source of that statistical exceedance? Do we need to do anything further? That will put us into what the state calls an assessment monitoring program, where we have to install additional wells and test for additional parameters and identify what's going on at the site.
So, sorry. So the school teacher that was worried about your groundwater contamination, from what she's describing, is flowing away from the school. So that's kind of a good thing.
Yeah, this school is to the
Flowing-
east of the
it's flowing
site,
to
right?
somewhere,
Or
you know?
west.
It's flowing
Yeah,
to
we're
Wayne
straight
County.
west. There's another school
That's where I
that's to
live.
the east.
Okay, that's the one I was
Flowing
saying,
that
you were
direction.
saying on your west.
But are you on
So
Wells?
upgrading of
No.
the facility.
We're
Yeah,
on
yep.
Yeah, so it's a little bit lesser concern.
But you might also want to say that on the east side, along Napier Road, there was a slurry wall put in.
Yes, exactly.
Because the
So-
clay didn't come all the way to the surface. I mean, that was Holloway's old sand pit, so.
Yeah, that's why I was asking about what was natural and what was upgraded.
Right,
Oh,
so
okay.
there's an old landfill.
Maybe
and
that's the one I'm
what they
thinking
refer
of.
to as an east landfill over here. This one was old, closed many years ago. So there was a remediation system put in place, a slurry wall, to collect or to keep the groundwater that's under the landfill in its place. And then there's a pump system inside here to pump groundwater out. It's treated and then managed that way. There is a slurry wall here, and then the remediation system from the pumped water was approved closed in It was installed in 1990, and closure approval for the remediation system was about
It was in the
2002.
2000, yeah.
So currently, they're just managing the liquid waste that comes out of here.
How long have you been taking these measurements? How many years?
The site has been monitoring since,
I meant your company.
how long have I worked for?
Well, how long has Golder Associates
Been monitoring this. I've been doing it with Golder Associates since for the last 4 years. The site has been under Golder's care for at least the last year.
Well, and we've done portions,
Yep.
yeah, for many years, so I don't know when we started.
Their original permit would have required it, even their investigative studies before they even put it in would have had
Right.
to do all this.
So,
Right.
yeah, Holloway, then BFI, then Tom was going through the
The list of
changes in
owners,
Yeah, there's been about, what, 5, 6 owners?
Yeah, and they've all been required to do this quarterly
Mhm.
monitoring, so there's, data going all the way back to.
I'm just,
well, this
Usually
is
they go
1990.
2000.
just wondering if there's ever been something with the limit. Ever.
Yeah.
But
If
I
there's
don't want
ever
to get,
what?
if you're getting,
Yeah.
if you're getting this. So you've been measuring a long time, I was gonna say, have you ever seen something that's?
What's your
above-
trend?
Above the
Certainly,
limit,
we've,
or is it- yeah, exactly.
we have reacted in the past to statistical exceedances, and a lot of times we'll see something that looks like a statistical trend or an increase, and a lot of times those are due to sampling or laboratory variability. So we'll chase those things down. If we see something in our statistics, we have to go out, we'll resample to verify it. And
Well,
then
yeah.
when it's verified, then we have to follow through all the state steps in determining whether or not this is something that's a result of landfill impact, or if it's simply a result of some variability in sampling protocol.
Mhm.
And Don talked, and what you see up there, there's statistical limits, and then there are groundwater protection standards. So our statistical limits are usually much lower than the protection standard.
Mhm.
So that it's an early warning, basically,
Sure.
to tell us, if we've got a problem that we need to look at and address.
Have you ever
before we
exceeded,
get to-
right, have you ever exceeded not just MDEQs, but any, like whose standards or any other world standards? Because those tend to be a little bit more
The state's
strict.
groundwater protection standards, they
Yeah.
have to be at least as restrictive as EPA's.
Right.
But EP the lowest either.
So the state sometimes will have lower limits. than
Sometimes they
EPA
do.
will.
You take whichever one's lower, you're saying?
My question was, do you see any of the worldwide standards?
I don't have a
'Cause-
tally of
'cause
the
some who-
worldwide
Yeah,
standards.
but
Who
We
has
compare
lower
it
standards
to-
than even EPA does? And
Right.
we've tested to those before.
Sure. So the permit requires them to compare to the state's groundwater protection standards, so
Mhm.
that's what we're comparing to.
I guess the bottom line is, outside of statistical, have we seen any
There are
incline?
currently no exceedances of the state's groundwater health-based
Okay.
protection standards.
But, I mean,
Yep.
to address why was there a remediation system in so many years ago in the early 90s, there was groundwater contamination that was detected. Tom,
Yeah,
mentioned that.
the property east of Napier Road.
Yep.
Showed contamination.
And there was a lot of work done on that
Yeah.
site. They excavated soils, they put in the slurry wall to contain the leachate.
Is that
because
6 in Napier?
That part of the landfill was not lined. And they put in pumping wells and, all kinds of infrastructure to take care of that. And that system was approved for closure and abandonment 10 years ago, or something,
Yep.
something along those lines. The site has not yet abandoned the system because we're still managing the liquid that's coming out of, so inside the slurry wall, there's a pumping well, and it's pumping leachate, and we're treating and managing that water still. So until that gets dealt with, they're gonna continue to operate that system.
Do you see a cap ever going on that to limit the leachate going through it?
Absolutely, that's a requirement. When the landfill closes, you have to cap the whole thing, and they cap areas as they go in order to limit the amount of leachate that they're generating. So that's-
Right, but I'm thinking if that's still acting like a percolator, does it have a cap on it, or are you guys planning to put a cap on it?
Well, there is a cap on the old portion of the landfill, And there's also waste. The
Flowing through it.
newer part of the landfill is actually built on top of the old
Okay.
landfill. And so that helps, again, to
Cap
limit
it.
the amount of recharge and leachate generation
Mhm.
in that old waste.
Yeah.
Two questions. What does it mean to cap it?
To cap it?
Yeah.
So there are different requirements depending on the age of the waste, but typically there's a clay layer that's put over, and then sometimes there's a composite, a plastic layer that's put over the clay, and then usually when you go by the landfill, you see nice green vegetation. So there's a soil layer on top of that. If there's plastic, there's a soil layer on top of that for the grass to grow, and that helps to limit the erosion and some of those kinds of things. So
Essentially, it's an impermeable layer to prevent stormwater from becoming leachate.
Okay. And then my other question is, so you said you're pumping water up and treating it right now, and then is it getting pumped back in the ground afterwards? Where's it going?
So where the active landfill is, that leachate is pumped to a series of collection tanks, and it's managed through sanitary sewer discharge permits.
Okay.
And then from the old remediation system, that water is pumped to a series of lagoons, and it's where it's treated and then discharged to a surface water outfall.
So Johnson Creek,
Yep,
basically.
yep.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you say sanitary sewer permit, that's going into a treatment plant
Yep.
getting treated, and
Yep.
then it's also probably going to one of the creeks after that?
Well, that would be dependent on the wastewater treatment plant. Once it leaves our site, it's the wastewater we treat and discharge. That, that was pretty much it. So we talked about the surface water and how that's managed, and then that was question and answers. Does anybody else have any other questions?
The wastewater treatment for this old landfill,
Mhm.
this leachate, is that on that facility there?
Yeah, so there is a pump system for the old landfill, and water is collected here and it's pumped over to these treatment lagoons.
Okay.
And so they're treated here on site and then discharged through an outfall to Johnson Drain, and that Johnson Drain comes right through.
And that's
So-
regulated by DEQ.
Yep, so there's a NIPD's permit, so that the state issues a permit for this discharge as well. And during the discharge period, that water is sampled 3 times per week.
So, great, thanks for the presentation. I know that you guys have been doing some extra sampling in the neighborhoods, correct? Or has that just been air sampling you guys
I
been
think
doing?
it's just there.
Just been air? Okay.
Yeah.
That was one of the questions I had. Were you guys doing groundwater sampling because of the complaints that you had to our east? It's just been air sampling?
It's been air sampling, yeah, well, odor.
Okay. Because I see some of those outliers out there. I was wondering if that was.
These wells
part-
over here, no, so these wells were part of the old remediation system before they installed the slurry wall. So these wells were part of the old investigation.
Okay.
The slurry wall was installed here.
That makes sense. I
And they
was
just-
wondering why you had those
Right.
out there.
Yep, so they remain, and we take groundwater levels from them just to confirm the direction of groundwater flow.
And those are the wells where the groundwater was determined to be below standards. And so we don't sample them any longer.
Okay.
Because the concentrations over time have decreased, and they're now below standards.
How deep is the slurry wall, and what is it made out of?
The slurry wall is a low permeable barrier, so it's essentially a constructed clay and grout mixture. And the
I'm not
depth of
sure how
that.
they constructed that.
Yeah.
There's different ways to construct
We typically
slurry walls, but they,
samples.
yeah,
How far down
excavated
the
trench,
hill?
maybe Tom.
It's a bentonite slurry.
Yeah.
And they did it with a very slim backhoe, and then they injected as they dug.
Were you on set when they constructed this one?
I was in negotiations for Comcast.
So if they're to protect ground, how deep do they go?
Tied into the natural clay that's underneath.
Right.
So the wall is connected to the natural clay layer that's
Okay.
there, so.
Is
See,
this,
actually, on the picture this is, it's not a scale drawing or anything,
Right,
like
I know.
that, but just to give you an idea, you can see the red line is we're trying to depict the slurry wall there. And so generally, that slurry wall went down through that upper, you can see an upper sand layer.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it went through that sand layer and then down into the clay to, key into that clay so that the groundwater couldn't move through the sand anymore.
How deep was it?
How deep is it? It's variable. I don't know the exact depths, but I'm gonna guess 30 feet.
Yeah.
40 feet, somewhere in that range.
I can tell you that our drinking water, my drinking water, and I'm not far from the landfill, is about 200 feet. So
Right.
we're in the deep aquifer, we're not in the shallow.
Right.
So I don't think anybody's pulling water in that shallow.
No, no. Anybody, everybody to the east is on municipal
Right.
supply. And then, like you said, from what from a hydro investigation, hydro-geo investigation that we've done, the drinking water supply wells are much deeper than the units that we're monitoring.
You know that most of the wells are probably minimum 70 feet, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, because when she talked about shallow, middle, and depth,
Yeah.
I think most all of ours would be in your range calling it a deep well.
Yep.
Yep.
And this gentleman's talking about to the east, and I'm thinking, well, you guys are all
Yep.
municipal, you guys are.
I am. There's people who have their sprinkler systems based off wells, so, kids playing sprinklers. And then, I don't know about, I know this neighborhood, Northfield Ridge, but I think down here there's Plymouth Hills, it's a mobile home park. I don't know if they're on city water or not, to be honest.
They'd have to be on city. Park would not have enough.
I got some questions.
Well, let me rephrase it, they'd have to have one big.
Let me ask you a question. You got these homes over here.
Yep.
How would they be impacted by this in terms of groundwater or well water? And when I'm talking about well water, is people put in a shallow well over the water going on or something like that might then.
So groundwater is gonna, can I use your pen?
You can use my, I wish I'd known, because I have this little laser pointer and it goes through the.
Groundwater is gonna flow like this. So all of these houses right
Yeah.
here, so groundwater is flowing this way across the site. Groundwater is not flowing from the landfill underneath these homes.
So this landfill can't affect that.
Nope,
What would it affect? Down here?
down here.
An area
We would
hasn't been
see it,
developed yet.
any impacts from the
Or what-
landfill, we'd see it in these wells.
All right, so let's say
Anything
we
down.
see it here, how far would it go? I mean, if you're talking about groundwater, does it just go forever, or how far would it go? How much would it affect? I mean, we got a lot, here's the thing, okay?
To the next
We got a lot of
level,
lay
yes.
people that don't understand the technicals, okay? And they're saying, hey, I live over here, and that's over here, and my groundwater I'm worried about. People over here, maybe they live down here, I'm just curious, from a layperson standpoint, we know you can detect it, we know that you can react to it. Their concern is, how does it affect me when something goes really, really wrong?
This site is
Not
part of
that
the.
Flint has hurt anybody's opinion of how experts work. Sure.
It absolutely
Well, I'm
is.
worried about Gelman's, really, right? In Ann Arbor, where
Yeah.
Gelman had the contamination, the MTB or whatever it was.
Let's talk about this here. So where's the water
So
going? What's
this
that?
whole area is part of the River watershed,
Right.
so our water is flowing south towards the tributary to the Rouge River and eventually out to probably Lake Erie, Detroit River. So the next largest water body this way is where that primary aquifer would surface.
And in your opinion, these wells, are they set at the right depth so that you would detect? And when I say depths, I'm not just talking about how deep they are, but how shallow they are. These are going to detect anything coming off that site, or are you going to miss something? Could you scientifically miss something coming off site?
So these wells are set in all three, the upper, the middle, and the lower aquifers. So the state requires us to monitor the first water body you're gonna hit below the site, and then we're monitoring both the intermediate and the deeper aquifer. The deeper aquifer is continuous across the site, so groundwater that passes this point is going to pass this point. Whereas the intermediate and the shallow aquifers, those are they're not continuous, and they're sporadically placed. So
I'm just a devil's advocate,
Yeah.
because see, I don't trust government, so I don't care what the state says. What I want to know is from a scientific standpoint, which science would.
Are they nested wells?
That was my,
Yes.
yeah, that was my
So,
next question.
so they're shallow, intermediate, and deep.
At the single point.
Yeah,
So
certainly
we-
not every point.
Right,
Well,
not every
right.
point, but the shallow aquifer is not present on the south side of the site, only up here at the north end.
Now, I'm gonna try and get you a little more business. I ask you a question. Looking at this site and the way this is all monitored right now, from your professional standpoint, with all your collective expertise, what would you do to make it better in terms of monitoring? Anything?
Well, the one monitoring system we haven't talked about is the leachate collection
Yeah.
system. So the active landfill has a secondary leachate collection system and a primary leachate collection system. They monitor the volumes coming through those, and according to their permit, any increase in volume over an engineered designed level, then they have to test that water.
So what would you do to make this better? Anything, or is it pretty much set?
I would say it's set, you know, in terms of the monitoring system.
And the frequency of monitoring is adequate, even though it's done by state regulation? The frequency, in your opinion, would be that you would spot something before it could affect a human?
Yes, what's the groundwater flow
The
rate?
groundwater flow rate is less than 2 feet per year,
And you test how often?
4 times a year.
So would it get like 6 inches by the time you found?
And that doesn't even consider the number of years it would take for that.
Joe, you're
groundwater-
not to fish in this
Yeah.
area.
So the other question I had is on the landfill design, I've got two questions because this affects groundwater. Are you doing individual cells where those are lined, or is it one big bowl that's in there when you
Here's a
do?
picture.
Yeah. Yeah, so you have a mini version of this picture, but, so the design is what we call a double composite system for the newer cells. So
Right.
that we talked about the oldest part of the landfill on the east is unlined, so there was no liner, and that's why we had to construct a slurry wall to contain the liquids there. The newer landfill cells are built with what we call a double composite system, where there's a primary liner, which is a 60 mil plastic liner, and then a secondary, another 60 mil plastic liner, and that's separated by sand or a drainage media. I'm not even sure what the design
You have a
is.
geosynthetic clay liner,
Okay, so
there's
there's,
a drainage layer,
yep,
could be a geocomposite.
yeah. So there's some type of drainage media in between those two pieces of plastic, two layers of plastic, that you can use to monitor, is there a leak in the primary system? So you're checking that all the time, and there's a calculation that has to be made to show the rate of flow in that secondary system. It has to be below a certain rate, so
1 in 1 million years.
1 in 1 million years.
I think it's 10 to the 5.
Yeah,
I remember
it's
right.
Low.
Yep.
It's low rate of flow.
So you're doing the double layer now. So moving into this area, the other question I had, was this always a C and D type landfill, or what's the history, what's been put in this landfill? I know you have construction, demolition, you got municipal garbage. Is there ACM in here? Was there any other things put in this landfill?
What do those acronyms mean, CMD and ACM?
So construction and demolition material, and then we have normal garbage like that comes out of your house. Some of the landfills are also permitted for asbestos in a special area. And then in older days, they had open whatever was a pit, just dump, and you're really uncontrolled. Today, you probably log, every truck comes in, you know where it goes in every cell, and you can take it apart. I'm more interested in the early days, because there's been a number of owners. When you look for what's in groundwater, you want to know what was put in the landfill to make sure that you're looking for the right constituents and you're monitoring. So not knowing the history of the landfill, which is, how many years old, 20?
That's since 1970, so it's close to 50.
Yeah, so that's the other question I'm curious about, and that's not just this company, it's the predecessors to it. What was put in there, and you're more concerned with the older area than you are with the newer areas, because the newer areas are really well monitored.
Is there a broad spectrum testing you could do that would pick up just about anything that might be hazardous to human health?
There's a required list. The state has a required list as part of the Part 115 regulations. And one thing that I think mentioned it is that in addition to the groundwater sampling on the perimeter, so to partially address your question, we also collect leachate samples from inside the landfill. So whatever's leaking through and getting to the bottom and captured by those plastic liners, we're taking samples of that liquid and testing it so that we can see what is our source, and then we're checking the groundwater against that source to say, you know, what's the representative contaminants that we're looking for, and then we're going to look for those in the groundwater. So
I can tell you during the PFI era, there were no hazardous waste that went in there.
Right. Yeah.
In the east and in the west, you know, was also the era of leaking into the ground storage tanks. So you're going to get, you know, legal stuff. That's all manifested.
Right, that was the VTEC stuff that was asking
All the
about.
VTEC stuff that came in, but that's all manifested too.
We always hear about all the horror stories in the early days.
Yeah.
Everything from
What happened
radioactive material.
under Holloway?
That's the
I
times.
don't-
That's the stuff I worry more
But
about.
it's all in the east. It's all in the east anyways.
And the slurry walls up there.
Yeah.
And the slurry
Yeah.
wall is there, and that, like I said, that system has shown that concentration is, when the slurry wall was put in and all the work that's been done there, the concentrations dropped and have, you know, now they're below criteria.
And you were pulling out with wells. Were you guys sparging at all?
There were pump wells out here in this area.
Yeah.
So when those pump wells reached.
Dried. Did you guys sparge at all?
There wasn't sparging, it went through a series of different.
Organic
filters.
carbon?
There was a carbon, there was a zeolite filter, and then it went through a lined ditch and into the pond, you know, when all of those systems were
Yeah.
fully operational. So,
For us lay people, that's keeping the bad stuff from getting to us.
that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds very technical.
Just a question, because I'm trying to figure out all the terminology. So you said that you pumped out the leachate on the inside of the slurry wall, right?
Yep.
Do you test that leachate for the types of things that you're talking about that might be in that old landfill?
We do,
Okay.
yeah.
Does that go over the limit?
Yes, that's over the limit, but there's treatment, and then we're required to meet a discharge limit before it goes out to the Johnson
So
drain.
there is a risk.
Sure. Yeah.
And, you know, I know statistically, you can't say with 100% certainty, there's no way it could get by your monitoring, correct?
That's right, yeah.
What would you put, like, is there a confidence interval, or, you know, do you have like 90% chance you'll catch it?
Well, yeah, I mean, our statistics are usually a 95 or 99% confidence
Okay.
level. But again, those statistical limits are set much lower than a groundwater protection standard. So our statistical limits that we're measuring against, that Dawn said, every now and then we get a blip for one reason or another. Sometimes it could be a laboratory error, sometimes it could be a sampling error. Sometimes it's the landfill, and you know, when it's the landfill, we have to have those conversations. In this case, we're not seeing those kinds of things. Where you know, there's back and forth and up and down from time to time, but those numbers are always below ground.
But the chance of a vertical laminar flow coming in between two wells ain't gonna happen.
Right.
Not in nature.
What's the requirement for after the landfill closes? How long does the monitoring have to go for?
30 years is what the rules say. But I can tell you that
Yeah.
a lot of landfills are now coming up on 30 years, and the regulators are saying, well, maybe we need to go a little longer
So
than
job
that.
security for you.
Yeah, job security. It really depends on.
Yeah, I've heard that because
Yeah.
I've gotten calls from hazardous waste landfills. Come get your stuff.
Are your results public record on
Yes.
file with MDQ? So anybody can
Yep.
go up and
Yep.
check them out and see where things are at and what trends are there, and just talk about that.
Absolutely.
I know you gotta get going with your time, like it's 9:30 right now.
He just turned white.
Yeah, exactly.
What are the triangle symbols on there? The two, there's one on the
Oh.
east and one on the north.
So these are locations where we don't monitor groundwater quality. We just take groundwater elevations to flow direction.
I was waiting for her to say, oh, I wish nobody asked that.
What seasonal fluctuations do you guys get as far as drop?
I'm sorry?
What seasonal fluctuations do you guys get in drop?
It's minor
Is it?
because of the clay-lit separation.
It's good to know just for my well. I've never run dry, but I'm just curious. I've never measured it. I want to make sure that so you don't really see a big change in summer or winter.
No, in fact, our wells are probably, some of them are between the shallow ones, 20 to 30 feet. The deeper ones are 80, 90 feet. And our depth to water is 20 feet. So it's an artesian aquifer up into that clay.
Okay.
So if I understand correctly, you've not only laid out our fears about water quality in the area, but you've also told him he can do as long as he's off as he wants in the wintertime.
Oh, it's hard water. It's hard. You got to have soft.
Yep.
Anybody who lives in our township knows that you got to put softeners in it. But
I
Anybody have
plead the
any other
fifth. My
questions?
husband tries to put a limit on me.
Yeah, I have one more question. You said that the Johnson's drain is tested 3 times a week. Who tests that?
This is during our discharge period. So the permitted discharge period through the NPDES permit from these ponds is December through April.
Okay.
And the state identifies that because their primary concern is aquatic life in the drain, and they want to monitor temperatures and primarily ammonia levels. So, because that affects fish and critters and the foliage the most, the ammonia levels. So we monitor that 3 times per week during the discharge.
Well, so you monitor that, and so we're able to monitor it before discharge
Yep.
in the reservoir, and then
Yep.
after discharge.
Yep.
So kind of double.
It's continuous flow through an outfall that's monitored 3 times per week.
Do you ever monitor further downstream, further down Johnson Creek?
No, our permit requires us to take a look at the discharge point in Johnson Drain just for visual inspection. You know, are we causing erosion? Is there increased sediment there? Or is there any visual evidence of some sort of impact to the Johnson Drain? And since it's got some overland flow from the outfall before it hits the drain, there's a lot of tall grasses. So we haven't seen any visual evidence of any impact from the discharge. And most of it is sediment. That's one of the biggest concerns through the drain. And we're not seeing it like the silty color where our discharge is at.
what about olfactory? Any smells out of it?
No.
Just
So
the
we observe
landfill.
for sheens and
Right.
odors and then the turbidity.
Yeah.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you, everybody.
So much fun. If you want to take a gift cup, I don't know if you.
Can't get it through security.
I know, that's more than 2.8 ounces.
Always fine on an airplane.
Yeah.
Homeland Security?
His name is.
No, you don't want to give a name, just a description.
I actually have a question for Matthew. I'm sorry to interrupt, but how does this, I mean, you pay a lot of attention to Johnson's Creek, and what are the concerns that you hear about Johnson Creek, and does it relate to anything that we've talked about here?
Yeah, well, so in general, Johnson Creek is our highest quality tributary to the Rouge. So we do aquatic macroinvertebrate sampling, so we check for the bugs that you're talking about being at risk especially. And Johnson has generally the best levels of aquatic macroinvertebrates of any of the tributaries. And you can see why that is if you look at a map of land use in the Salem Township. That area of Northville is really not very developed compared to the rest of the Rouge. So there's not nearly as much flashy stormwater flows going in. So that's mostly what we're looking at and concerned about. In most point source pollution, so like the landfills have been managed over the last 20, 30 years with the Clean Water Act. So we're more generally concerned about just, the water that's running off of roads and roof surfaces and all the pollutants that it carries with. So that's mostly what we're looking at especially.
So it doesn't come into play much, the groundwater that becomes the Rouge and the...
I will say that, my background is in landscape architecture, and in the exact opposite kind of pollution that we're talking about here, so this is all new. So I was actually very excited for tonight's conversation.
It's Salem, it's spring fed, so it kind of starts over there. We monitor at Salem, and we do have like top quality over there. And I know I ran that program for the 15 years I was teaching until the last couple of years. We're still doing that. So I know as far as at our point, as far as the water quality monitoring goes, because we did it with Friends of the Rouge, we always had great quality. We had, I don't know what you rated it, excellent or something like that. But yeah, further south, or further east, I keep wanting to say south.
Yeah, I
But
should
further
get into-
east, I'm not sure where the next spot is, so I'm trying to look that up now.
As you get into Northville, the quality starts to degrade. You get a lot more impervious surface on average across the area.
Is that the MPD standards you're talking about?
I'm not really talking about those kinds of standards per se. I'm talking about just what we find in terms of aquatic macroinvertebrates, the bugs that we're seeing.
I've got a colleague I work with, he's a PhD, wild biologist, that comes out to this area to study that creek specifically because of the amount of animals that are in it.
Oh yeah, you get great stuff back in the trails behind Salem. I mean, just amazing things.
Well,
I was going to say, there are a few other water quality things that we do too, besides the macroinvertebrates. You look at pH, you look at temperature change, which is one of the things that Dawn was mentioning. We look at, it's been a couple of years since I've done it.
Total dissolved
But,
oxygen, you guys?
Yeah, total dissolved
Some
oxygen.
TDOs and
We didn't do the
PSSs.
bio one though, because that was one we'd have to send in, and we were working with fourth graders, so that one was a little bit above their head. But there's a couple of different chemical ones. I think the years that I did it, the biggest fluctuation would have been runoff from fertilizers. One year we had a lot of rain, and that was higher than other years that I had done it.
And it's not, forget, you've got a golf course right to the south of you guys too, which puts a lot of nitrates.
In most watersheds, those are actually the biggest issues that they
Right.
experience. In the Rouge, it's mostly single-family homes throughout the watershed.
All those nitrates going in.
With your sampling program with the school, you did that with your students?
Yeah, we did it
Did
with
you-
fourth grade. We still do. I just don't teach fourth grade anymore, so they kicked me out.
Gotcha. Do you get grant sponsorship for that? Or is that
Actually,
all-
Friends of the Rouge sponsors us, and for a while it was corporate sponsors. I don't know if we still have corporate sponsors. I've been out of that game for about 3 years, but yeah, we were sponsored through corporate sponsors, through Friends of the Rouge. We ordered the supplies and everything from them, and taught the kids what we were doing, and went out and we had a monitoring day. We did spring monitoring